In another world, one where magic still answered to human, will the name Sung Jinwoo once inspired both awe and terror. He had risen from weakness, from the trembling ranks of the powerless, to the seat of a god, the Monarch of Shadows, ruler of death's reflection. Yet, on the day he challenged the limits of that throne, something looked back. It began as an experiment, a simple command to the darkness: open all gates. But no mortal nor god was meant to open every door at once. The sky split, not into light, but into screaming color, a billion shards of psychic agony twisting through dimensions. It wasn't mana that surged around him anymore. It was something older, crueler, the warp. For one infinitesimal moment, Jinwoo's consciousness stretched beyond comprehension. He saw oceans of thought that moved like storms, heard laughter that predated reality, and felt eyes, too many eyes, watching him through the cracks of space. Then came the tearing. The Shadow Monarch screamed, though no sound left his lips. His army, those who had followed him even into death, were ripped apart, their souls unraveling like ink in boiling water. He tried to command them, but the system did not answer. It had never been his to command. "You thought you were a god, little one," whispered a voice that wasn't a voice. But here, even gods are prey. He fell not through air, nor through space, but through thought itself. The warp was not a place. It was madness given form, a sea of raw emotion, where the dreams of the dead and the screams of the unborn intertwined into something alive. Time ceased to mean anything. Seconds bled into centuries. His own essence began to rot under the weight of unfiltered divinity. Every shadow he had ever commanded began whispering back to him, questioning his throne, his purpose, his humanity. He glimpsed worlds as he fell, planets burning under golden banners, titans made of faith and steel walking through void-lit cathedrals, and at the center of it all, a corpse on a throne whose heartbeat shook galaxies. "Who are you?" Jinwoo thought, as his consciousness began to fracture. And something answered, "I am the end of all things that thought themselves alive." The voice was not one, it was legion, a chorus of dying gods, broken angels, and laughing daemons. He tried to fight it, to call upon his soldiers. "Arise," he whispered. Nothing came, only silence. And in that silence, something inside him cracked. He realized he was utterly alone, stripped bare of command, power, and meaning. The Monarch of Shadows was no longer a ruler, but a man falling endlessly into a sea of psychic death. At some point, he didn't know when, he began to see his own memories scattered in the warp. His mother's quiet smile, his sister's laughter, the streets of Seoul, the blood, the battles, the endless climb toward strength. All of it looked so small now. Was this what it meant to ascend? He wondered. To rise so high that the universe itself tries to crush you back down? He laughed, then softly, bitterly. The sound was devoured by the warp, and still, he fell. He passed by a shape, a mountain of flesh covered in faces that screamed prayers to gods who had long since forgotten them. He saw a star collapse, not under gravity, but under sin. He saw a world flayed alive, its continents rearranged into the sigil of a god whose name could not be spoken. Through it all, he endured. Not because he was unbreakable, but because he refused to stop existing. That was Sung Jinwoo's curse and his strength. When the warp finally spat him out, it was like being born through a scream. He landed upon cold, metal, wet, rusted, breathing with machinery. The air reeked of oil and decay. Above him, the sky was black and infinite, pierced by the glare of neon cathedrals built into impossible spires. The world felt wrong. There was no mana, no familiar hum of magic beneath the skin. Instead, there was something thicker, heavier, like a suffocating presence pressing down upon every atom of his being. He tried to stand. His legs shook, his shadow clung to the floor, writhing like a dying creature. "Where am I?" he breathed. No answer, only the distant sound of chanting, low, mechanical voices repeating ancient hymns to a god of metal and light. The air vibrated with static, with faith so strong it almost had texture, and beneath it all he could feel the hum of machines, endless and alive, like organs of a single planetary corpse. He had fallen into a world that worshipped death disguised as order. He didn't know it yet, But this was the Imperium of Man, a place where faith replaced science, and science had become worship. Something moved nearby, a flicker of metal limbs. A creature half human, half machine turned its head toward him, eyes glowing red. It looked at him not with curiosity, but with recognition. Unidentified biosignature detected. It droned. Subject radiates warp contamination. Purge protocol initiated. Gunfire lit the dark. Bolts of holy flame tore through the air. Jinwoo leaped instinctively, body remembering battles from worlds long gone. He moved faster than human eyes could track, but slower than he remembered. Something was wrong. The shadow inside him flickered weakly, like a dying star. He grabbed one of the creatures, a servitor, though he did not know the word, and crushed its throat. Oil, blood, and data spilled across the floor. The chanting grew louder. More figures approached, robed and mechanical, bearing symbols of the Omnissiah, the machine god. Jinwoo looked down at his trembling hand. It wasn't mana that burned beneath his skin, it was something else. Something that didn't belong in any world he knew. He felt it calling. The warp, the same storm that had consumed him now, pulsed faintly inside his veins. And in that instant, he understood a truth that chilled even him. He had not escaped the warp. He had brought a piece of it with him. He raised his eyes to the towering statues of iron saints that watched him from every direction, their faces expressionless, their halos made of steel and circuitry. "If this is another world," he whispered, "then it is one already damned." The wind carried the sound of distant bombardments, orbital cannons purging entire districts. Heretics burned in the name of the Emperor, the endless machine of faith grinding on. Sung Jinwoo, the Shadow Monarch, had fallen into a universe where hope was heresy and salvation was mechanized. And somewhere, deep within the warp, something laughed. A voice, familiar and cruel. "Welcome, Hunter. Let's see how long your shadows last." In the dark, the first thing Sung Jinwoo noticed was the silence, not the comforting quiet of a midnight forest or the stillness before battle. This silence felt mechanical, cold, calculated, as though the air itself waited for permission to move. The sky above him was no sky at all. It was a ceiling of steel and smoke, cathedral spires rising into smog, chained together by bridges of rust and cables that dripped with oil and blood. Dim crimson lights flickered like dying stars, their glow warped through the haze. The air tasted of metal, burnt incense, and human despair. He was standing within a hive city, though the name meant nothing to him yet. A labyrinth built not by architects, but by the blind devotion of countless hands, a world devoured by its own faith. He stumbled forward, each step echoing on the metal floor. His body was heavy, too heavy. His shadow dragged behind him sluggishly, as if reluctant to follow. The bond between him and the darkness was fractured. The Monarch of Shadows, the eternal commander of death, now felt as fragile as the humans he once pitied. He reached out instinctively. "Arise," he whispered, voice cracking. But the world did not respond. No shadow stirred. No eyes glowed beneath the veil. The system, the cold, invisible intelligence that had once guided him, was gone. His voice fell flat against the rusted walls. The only answer was the slow, rhythmic chant echoing from somewhere above. "Praise the Omnissiah. Flesh is weak. Steel is eternal." It was not prayer. It was programming. Jinwoo turned a corner and saw them, the priests of this world, men and women who had traded humanity for gears and devotion. Their faces were pale and bloodless, their eyes replaced by lenses that whirred as they moved. Tubes ran through their veins, pulsing with oil instead of blood. They moved in synchronized steps, chanting in a language that resembled machine code and liturgy combined. Their temple was a shrine of contradictions, part laboratory, part cathedral. Cables coiled like serpents around altars made of bone and iron. Massive engines thrummed beneath stained glass depictions of a golden god, half man and half machine, staring down upon the congregation with lifeless mercy. The Adeptus Mechanicus, though Jinwoo had no words for them, knelt before their deity, the Omnissiah, the machine god. And though they prayed for enlightenment, he could feel it. There was no divinity here, only repetition, only control. He stepped closer, unseen. To them, he was merely another silhouette among thousands until the air changed. The nearest tech priest stopped chanting. His head snapped around, lenses focusing. Unregistered bio sign detected. A metallic voice rasped. Organic form radiates non-standard energy signature. More heads turned. The chant faltered. Jinwoo froze, instinct clawing at the back of his skull. His shadow twitched weakly at his feet, like a starving beast sensing blood. Then came the command. By decree of the Omnissiah, purge the unclean. Dozens of red-lensed eyes locked onto him. Servo skulls whirred through the air, weapons unfolding from their sides. The temple filled with the high-pitched scream of charging plasma. For a heartbeat, Jinwoo's instincts took control. He moved. The first shot missed him by inches, vaporizing a chunk of metal where he had stood. He dove into the shadows only to realize there was no true darkness here. The hive was drowned in artificial light, every corner illuminated by the faithful glow of their machines. Still, he tried. The shadow beneath one of the tech priests flickered, and for a brief, glorious moment, it obeyed. A tendril of darkness lashed out, wrapping around the priest's mechanical limb and dragging him screaming into the black. His body convulsed as the shadow devoured him molecule by molecule, leaving behind only oil-stained robes. The others recoiled. They had seen daemons, heretics, mutants, but this was different. This was something that shouldn't exist. Witchcraft, one hissed. Warp taint. Jinwoo didn't correct them. He simply looked down at his trembling hand, half bathed in smoke, and whispered to himself, "I thought I left this behind." But the truth settled in his bones like lead. The power he carried was no longer his. It had been corrupted by the warp. Every use of it pulled something closer, something vast and hungry. He could feel it lurking just beyond sight. Watching. The warp was not finished with him. Another burst of plasma shrieked through the air. Jinwoo ducked behind a column, feeling heat sear across his shoulder. His flesh burned but healed slower than before. The smell of scorched skin filled his nostrils. He had faced gods before, monarchs, armies. But this was different. There was no glory here, no honor, only survival. He looked around, searching for escape. The hive's architecture was maddening spirals of steel leading nowhere, stairways vanishing into mist. Above, he could hear the machinery of the city grinding like the jaws of some colossal beast. He moved quietly, slipping through maintenance tunnels, away from the temple and its metallic zealots. His heartbeat echoed through the corridors. When he finally emerged into the open, the world stretched endlessly before him, an ocean of rust, filth, and light. He saw people then, tens of thousands of them, crammed into slums built from scrap metal and faith. Their eyes were dull, their skin gray from factory soot. They prayed to the emperor with mouths too tired to move, clutching icons of bone and brass. Above them, loudspeakers blared sermons promising salvation through obedience. And through it all, Jinwoo felt nothing. No compassion, no anger. Only a quiet, sinking realization that he had landed in a place far worse than any battlefield he had ever known. This was not hell. Hell required passion, hatred, fire, purpose. This was colder, a place where even suffering had become routine. He looked down at the people, at their broken bodies and mechanical limbs. They were prisoners of faith, enslaved not by power, but by belief. A small child stumbled near him, clutching a tin can filled with water. Her eyes met his dark, hollow, but still human. Before he could speak, a robed enforcer stepped forward, striking her across the face. "Work, not wander," the man barked. "The Emperor sees all." The girl didn't cry. She simply bowed her head and shuffled away. Jinwoo's hand clenched. His shadow quivered at his feet, eager, hungry. He could end this cruelty in an instant. A thought, a command, and the enforcer would be swallowed whole. But he didn't. Because in this world, justice meant nothing. Killing him would only feed the machine. He turned away. The whisper of the warp brushed his mind, soft as a lover's breath. "You see it now, don't you? This place is already ours." Jinwoo closed his eyes, forcing the voice away. He needed to understand this place before it consumed him as it had consumed them all. He began to walk, deeper into the city's labyrinth, past shrines of rusted saints, past rivers of oil and bone, past machines that breathed and bled like living things. Each step echoed with quiet defiance. In another life, he had been a hero, a monarch, a savior. But here, in the grim darkness of the far future, he was just another shadow. And for the first time in centuries, Sung Jinwoo felt small. He learned the city by its wounds. By day, if there was a day here, the hive throbbed like a cauterized heart, pumping labor through arteries of rust and smoke. By night, the machine did not sleep, it only whispered. That was when Sung Jinwoo moved. He started with the tunnels that bled warmth, maintenance shafts where pipes rattled like bones, and the drip of condensed steam kept time for the condemned. Down there, the air was a grave, and the light was a rumor. He stalked with empty hands and a starving shadow, listening to the city exhale its prayers. The first thing he killed wore a human face without the inconvenience of a human will. A servitor, mouth sewn shut, eyes replaced by cold glass. The augmetic harness bolted into its spine hummed with a subvocal litany, productive hours, authorized pain, blessed depletion. It carried a crate that smelled like sanctified solvent and dissolved hope. Jinwoo stepped out, and the servitor did not flinch. They never did. It raised the crate with perfect obedience, a motion so smooth it felt obscene. He took its throat in one hand and crushed. Meat yielded. Steel complained. The litany skipped, broke, and died. For a heartbeat, nothing else happened. No system window, no fanfare. Then, something too thin to be called a wind slid over his skin. It was like being watched by the absence of light. A filament of night peeled off the servitor's shadow and flowed into his own. Not mana, not the familiar velvet of obedient darkness. This was warp-kissed, bitter contaminated, the way water tastes on a world that forgot the word river. His power twitched awake inside him, but it was a fever's awakening. Wrong, hot, hungry. He staggered, one hand against the wall. Is this how you survive here? He asked the tunnel, or the machine, or the god it pretended to be. No one answered. He kept moving. Mutants came next, those whom the hive had chewed without swallowing. They huddled in culverts, half baptized by runoff and radiation, whispering slogans they thought were prayers. Fingers like cables, teeth like broken purity seals. Some begged, most lunged. Jinwoo did not hate them. Hate was a luxury that needed time. He killed them cleanly when he could, mercifully when he couldn't. Every death flickered a fraction more shadow back into him, but each return was mixed with something like sand in the blood. He could feel it accumulate. The warp did not lend. It colonized. The cultists required more care. They wore the city's despair like vestments. Their eyes gleamed with the comfort of certainty, how easy it must be to know that the world hates you and that your God loves your hate. Knives of scrap, tattoos of devotion scored into skin with machine oil and rust. They screamed the names he would not repeat, and on their tongues the syllables sounded like house fires. When they rushed him under a broken conveyor, 20 bodies. One mind, a hymn in the shape of a blade his instincts chose for him. The tunnel's light strobed, the space between breaths dilated, and his shadow wrung itself tall. Arise. The word left without permission. It did not resonate. It detonated. The darkness beneath the closest cultist convulsed, rose, and hardened into a spear. It entered through his open mouth and left through the vacuum where a faith should have been. Others followed, tendrils like oil, claws like absence. The fight lasted 7 seconds, and all of them died praying. Jinwoo stood among the bodies, the tunnel filled with the smell of boiled iron and prayer smoke, and listened to the echo of what he had just done. The shadow at his feet was thicker now, a pool with no surface. It pulsed not with obedience, but with appetite. Not yours, he whispered to himself. Not truly. He waited for the guilt that used to visit him after victories that cost too much. Nothing came. Only the mechanical hush of the hive, measuring him the way a tool measures a blade, in utility, not morality. He hunted for 3 cycles, if cycles existed here. Time in the hive felt like a lie the city told to keep people dying on schedule. He mapped patrols by the taste of ozone they left behind. He learned the sound a servo skull makes when it is pretending to be a moth. He learned where the floor sings thin beneath too much weight. He learned the difference between sanctioned fear and unsanctioned hope. And the people watched. They always watch. even when they pretend not to. A food line bent like a spine beneath a shrine of welded saints. A foreman struck a worker for breathing with insufficient gratitude. A penitent counted lashes in high Gothic, and then, after a thoughtful pause, counted them again in low. When Jinwoo passed, the crowd did what crowds do around strange gravity. It parted without meaning to. He avoided the Arbites when he could, and the Mechanicus when he couldn't. The red-robed priests were surgical in their piety. They tracked anomalies the way astronomers track comets with devotion and an appetizing dread. They did not fear him as a man, they feared him as a malfunction. So he learned to be a rumor. He ate where the habstacks cracked and leaked warm air. He slept where the vents spoke loudly enough to drown the dreams. He murdered in unlit geometry, always where the city would clean up after him out of habit, not malice. And slowly, inevitably, the voices began. At first, they were habits, echoes of instinct wearing masks: kill, eat, hide. But then they cohered into tones he knew without introduction. One laughed like a sword finding bone. More, more. Another crooned with velvet rot. We can make this gentle. A third welcomed him the way a fire welcomes paper. It is good to be used, is it not? And the last spoke with the patience of a labyrinth. You already know the way. It only hurts because you remember a different map. Jinwoo did not answer. He tightened his will around his name and let the voices slide off it like rain off stone. But stone erodes, especially in acid. On the fourth cycle, call it that he met a preacher without a church. The man wore a coat that had been blue before the city taught it humility. His hands were inked with verses in a script that seemed to remember sunlight. He was giving the people something forbidden, not hope, which gets you killed, but context, which gets you targeted. Faith is a machine, the preacher said to 6 listeners pretending to be asleep. It takes what you put in. It returns what it was designed to return. If you want different answers, you must change the design. Jinwoo stood in the doorway and let the man see him. The preacher did not startle. He had the eyes of a man who had stopped bargaining with fear. You're not from here, the preacher said. No, you will be, the preacher said, with an apology in his voice that wasn't for Jinwoo. The city digests everything. Does it digest the warp? That made the preacher's mouth twitch like a wound, thinking about healing. The city is the warp's favorite meal. You talk like a heretic. I talk like a man who stops lying in his sleep. The listeners had stilled. One pretended to continue snoring and forgot to breathe. Somewhere above them, a siren considered waking. Leave this level, the preacher told Jinwoo softly. The Inquisition has started asking the right questions. When they do that, the answers are always nails. Jinwoo tilted his head. You're warning me. I'm warning the place you'll ruin if you stay. He should have left then. Instead, he made a mistake that had the shape of mercy. He followed the preacher for 3 corridors, shadow silent, until the ambush sprang from the vents like a cough. Not Arbites, not Mechanicus, cultists, expensive ones. The kind who eat before they kill and kill before they pray. Their masks were flensed faces lacquered to a priestly sheen. Their knives were missionary work. Jinwoo moved before they did. He did not have enough power for precision. He had enough for conviction. Arise. 2 shadows yawned into wolves, blunt and eager and unafraid to be ugly. They tore. The corridor echoed with wet grammar. Jinwoo took the last cultist with his hands. Because sometimes the most efficient path is also pedagogical. The body fell in 3 parts that did not agree to be separate. The preacher watched, unblinking. You can call the dark. It calls first, Jinwoo said. It was the closest thing to a confession he had permitted himself in this city. And it answers you. Today. The preacher nodded like a condemned man being fitted for an accurate rope. Then your today is over. The word hit the floor before the grenades did a clatter of metal, righteous and practical. The blast sent murals of light down the corridor. The wolves vanished. The shadows shrieked in a pitch only wounds can hear. Jinwoo covered the preacher with his body and tasted dust that was mostly people. When the haze cleared, the cultists were more parts than plan. The preacher bled from his ear in a polite line. Jinwoo's shoulder had become an argument between fire and function. He stood, slowly, because victory and standing are related but not synonymous. A servo skull hovered at the corner where the corridor pretended to end. Its lenses dilated like a prayer finding its verb. It watched. It fled. The preacher heard the tiny whine. Now they've seen you seeing them. That's twice. Twice. The children you didn't save, and the heretics you did. The city keeps a ledger. What does it charge? Interest, the preacher said. Payable in inquisitors. Silence took back the corridor. Jinwoo looked at his hands. They shook when he told them not to. The shadow at his feet flowed toward a crack in the wall, curious and patient. He understood then what hunting meant here. Not triumph. Not dominion. Maintenance. You killed not to win, but to keep losing slowly. He walked the preacher to a stairwell that did not believe in up. He did not say goodbye. The hive stenciled his footsteps with the ordinary holiness of movement. Go, go, go. At the landing, 3 robed shapes waited in the kind of stillness that is made, not found. Their seals were wax, their eyes were verdict. Rosettes glinted like small heavy suns. The one in front spoke, voice like a book you don't get to read. By mandate of the Ordo Malleus, kneel. Behind Jinwoo, the city exhaled. Above him, the lights dimmed as if to watch more clearly. Within him, the shadow smiled with too many teeth. He did not kneel. The Inquisitor's hand lifted, 2 fingers reciting a prayer that sounded suspiciously like aim. Servo skulls nested in the rafters woke like bats taught to love electricity. Somewhere, a choir started a hymn that had been used as both lullaby and last rites. Sung Jinwoo breathed in the hive its oil, its grief, its beautiful, efficient cruelty, and exhaled something older. Then, come take the knee, he said. The corridor did not move. The guns did, and the dark, which was not his, leaned closer to hear what he would name it next. There are moments when silence feels heavier than war. This was one of them. The air between Sung Jinwoo and the Inquisitor pulsed, not with sound, but with judgment, the kind that had killed billions before he ever existed. The corridor smelled of oil, prayer smoke, and something far older fear disguised as righteousness. The Inquisitor stepped forward, robes whispering like a blade being drawn. His armor was adorned with parchment seals written in the language of flame. Each line was a curse and a benediction at once. The man's eyes were hidden behind lenses of glass and gold, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like a choir strangling itself. In the name of the Emperor, submit. Behind him, 2 acolytes leveled their bolters. Servo skulls hovered above, their optical sensors glowing like dying stars. Every lens fixed upon Jinwoo's chest, as if trying to decide which organ to sanctify first. Jinwoo didn't move. He felt his pulse slow to a crawl. His shadow quivered, an animal waiting to remember its nature. I don't know your God, he said quietly. The Inquisitor tilted his head slightly, as if studying a specimen. Then you know blasphemy. And blasphemy knows the flame. Bolters screamed. The first explosion tore through the wall beside him. Heat washed across his face, carrying the metallic taste of ionized air. He rolled, feeling shards of metal slice into his arms. Pain bloomed, but pain was a language he spoke fluently. He whispered through his teeth, "Arise." The word came out hoarse, fractured, but it worked. The shadows along the floor shivered, recoiled, and then lunged. The corridor erupted in tendrils of black. They struck the acolytes, first snapping armor like glass, pulling them into the dark. The air filled with the sound of screams swallowed before they could finish. The Inquisitor didn't flinch. He raised his rosarius, and a sphere of blinding light expanded from his palm. Holy light, warp light. It cut through the shadows like a blade through water. Jinwoo staggered back, shielding his eyes. The darkness hissed, retreating as if wounded. Daemon, the Inquisitor hissed. You dare to stand in his domain? Jinwoo gritted his teeth. The warp energy burned through his veins, a parasite that had learned how to smile. I'm no daemon, he said. I just survived one. He leapt. The Inquisitor met him halfway, striking with his sword a relic wrapped in scripture, its blade etched with the words of execution. Jinwoo caught it in both hands. The metal burned his skin like molten faith. The Inquisitor's voice was calm, even as their strength locked together. Every creature of the warp believes itself pure. Jinwoo shoved him back. the blade cutting a shallow line across his chest. Smoke rose from the wound. His blood was no longer entirely red. "Maybe," he said. "But purity doesn't survive long where I come from." They clashed again. Sparks rained across the corridor. Bolter rounds ricocheted off walls as servo skulls screamed out psalms of destruction. The air was a storm of fire and shadow. Jinwoo moved like a memory of battle fluid, precise, merciless. But the Inquisitor fought with something worse than skill, conviction. Every swing was a sermon, every strike an exorcism. And the light, oh, the light hurt. The warp within Jinwoo writhed, rebelling against the purity that sought to erase it. His vision blurred, his body screamed for darkness. And then, the shadows obeyed. They surged, not from him, but through him. The corridor drowned in black fire. The Inquisitor staggered, shielding his eyes. Jinwoo's voice came out cold, almost detached. "You burn everything you don't understand. And you consume everything you touch." The Inquisitor spat back. "You are the same disease, wearing another face." They collided again, but this time, Jinwoo didn't strike to kill. He wanted to see the man's eyes. He wanted to understand what kind of faith could turn flesh into machinery and conviction into genocide. He tore the Inquisitor's mask away. What looked back was not rage but sorrow. A man whose eyes had seen too much to hope again. "Do you think I enjoy this?" the Inquisitor whispered. "Do you think the Emperor speaks to me?" "He's silent. He's always been silent. We burn, we cleanse, we kill not for his voice, but for the echo he left behind." He drove his blade into Jinwoo's side. The pain was white, total. Jinwoo's knees buckled. The Inquisitor leaned close, breath trembling. "And you are one more echo I will silence." But the shadows were already moving. They erupted from the floor, from the walls, from him. Dozens of black silhouettes clawed their way into existence. Servitors, mutants, cultists, all those he had killed since he arrived. Their eyes burned violet. Jinwoo gasped, realizing what he'd done. He hadn't summoned them. They had followed him. Every death he had dealt had left a footprint in the warp. And now, those footprints were walking. They surrounded the Inquisitor, silent as the void. The holy light flickered, dimmed, and died. The Inquisitor looked around, eyes widening for the first time. "This is no summoning. This is infestation." Jinwoo's voice was barely more than a whisper. "No, this is consequence." He turned his hand, and the shadows consumed the man whole. When the light returned, the corridor was empty, except for the echo of metal dripping with blood and scripture. He stood there for a long time, breathing in the silence. His wound burned like a brand. The smell of sanctified oil filled the air, and for the first time, Sung Jinwoo wondered if he had crossed the line between man and monster without noticing. He sank to his knees. The shadows swirled around him, restless, questioning. Somewhere far above, the hive continued its endless hymns, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge what had just been born beneath its feet. Then came the voice, not from the hive, not from the warp, from within. "You killed one of his chosen. Do you think he won't notice?" Jinwoo clenched his fists. "Let him." The darkness smiled around him. "He already has." Far away, within the sanctum of the Ordo Malleus, alarms began to sound. The death of an Inquisitor was not a crime, it was an event. Psychic beacons ignited. Words like daemon host, contagion, exterminatus began to circulate through Vox channels. And deep within the warp, something stirred. A ripple through the madness, a whisper made of memory. "So, the Monarch returns." Jinwoo rose, blood seeping from the wound that refused to close. His shadow stretched long against the metal floor, splitting into shapes that were not entirely human. He looked toward the upper spires of the hive, where the light of false saints burned eternal. Somewhere up there, the Imperium was already preparing its verdict. He had been hunted before. He had learned to become the thing that hunts back. The Monarch of Shadows inhaled the stink of oil and incense and began to walk. Each step echoed like the tolling of a funeral bell. In the grim darkness of the far future, death was not the end. It was the beginning of another kind of faith. Death came to Sung Jinwoo like a familiar creditor. It did not shout, it itemized. Blood seeped through his robes in a steady arithmetic, pooling in the grooves of the hive floor, tracing sigils that no priest would recognize and every daemon would. The wound from the Inquisitor's blade had a theology of its own, part sanctified steel, part psychic fire, and each throb wrote a new verse under his skin. He walked until walking lost its verb. He fell without ceremony. The chamber that received him had been a basilica once. Now it was a cannibalized foundry, its altars repurposed into workbenches, its reliquaries filled with screws, bones, and despair. Candles guttered in iron cages, their smoke braided with the sweet chemical reek of unblessed solvents. The walls were frescoed with scratches, prayers carved by hands that knew they would die before the sentence ended. The city breathed around him, hiss, clank, amen. Jinwoo tasted iron and the faint, metallic aftertaste of something watching. The shadow at his feet pooled, but it no longer felt like an obedient tide. It was a mouth considering a word. Not yet, he whispered, to no one he trusted. Not here. The darkness trembled, uncertain whether it was his servant or his heir. Above, the Voxhorns woke with a cough of static. A woman's voice, cold with official compassion, recited the day's ration revisions. In the background, the murmur of files being closed on lives. Somewhere deeper in the hive, bells tolled for an execution they called a celebration. Boots approached. Not the measured stomp of Arbites or the surgical glide of the Mechanicus, but the confident swagger of men who owned their own deaths. Chaos. A warband, small and proud, decorated in trophies. None of their mothers would have understood fingers braided into rosaries, purity seals re-inked with obscenities, a cuirass hammered from the lid of a reliquary. Their leader wore a helm that looked like a cathedral learning to hate itself. They found him kneeling, breath shallow, hands empty. Warp sick, one sneered. A gift. The leader gestured. Bind him. The gods like their meals alive. They advanced with blades that were also languages. Jinwoo raised his head. His eyes looked black at a glance. At a second glance, they were not colors at all, but distances. You came late, he said. And hungry. The first rushed him quick with triumph. Jinwoo moved, like someone remembering how to dance in a room full of knives. He avoided, redirected, borrowed the man's momentum, and returned it with interest. Bone and brass argued. Bone lost. Pain flashed in his side, a white confession. He staggered. The second cultist slashed his back. A third hammered his ribs. The world tightened into a tunnel, and at the end of it waited the sound of his name falling down a well. He fell to one knee. The shadow at his feet convulsed once, twice like a heart deciding to resume its work. I said, he breathed, not to the men, but to the thing that had been with him longer than any life. Not yet. Something in the air changed temperature. The candles leaned away as if pushed by a tide no meteorology could chart. The Voxhorns crackled with sudden static. Somewhere, a hymn forgot its words. The Chaos Warriors hesitated the way predators do when the forest finally answers back. Jinwoo closed his eyes. The wound spoke in heat. The warp sang in a choir of open throats, and beneath both, in a place that used to be called him, a door long barred by discipline and denial shuddered on its hinges. He remembered the first time he said the word that had made him king. He remembered what it cost. He said it again. Arise. The floor did not split. The sky did not open. Instead, absence accumulated like dusk poured from a pitcher. The shadows lengthened in ways geometry would file a complaint about, and then they stood up. The dead complied first. The Chaos Warrior whose spine he had broken earlier jerked, sat, and rose with a graceless miracle. His eyes were not eyes now, but coals. His mouth was a straight line that had forgotten vowels. He turned, not toward Jinwoo, but toward Jinwoo's will, and that will nodded. More followed, 2, 5, 11 each pulled from the inventory of the floor. Heretic, scavenger, penitent, rat. The foundry filled with the whisper of blades re-remembering use. Armor creaked its second oath. The air smelled of cold and old wine cellars. The living stepped back. Daemons, one hissed. No, the leader said, voice thin with doubt. This is something tamer. Tamed. Jinwoo corrected, standing with a slowness that read as assurance. He felt it then, the terrible, intimate tax of the word. Every shade that rose came through him. They braided themselves to his wound, to his breath, to the marrow that had learned new hymns in a different universe. Each soldier was a thread, and he the loom, and the fabric was not cloth but authority. But the warp had learned to counterfeit obedience. A fraction of the army's weight leaned elsewhere toward a storm that smiled. He caught the tug, set his jaw, and pulled back. The thread sang. It held. "Kill them," said the Chaos leader, because when men are uncertain they often choose the simplest liturgy. They charged. The shadows accepted. The first clash was not loud, void does not clang, but the aftermath was. Meat discovered speech, metal wrote its memoir, and faith tried to remember how to bleed. Shadow sabers bit through corrupted ceramite as if it believed it were allowed. A daemon blade met an absence blade and learned that subtraction can be aggressive. Jinwoo moved among them less commander than Axis. His soldiers took their angles from the angle of his shoulders. When he turned his head, things died in that direction. When he blinked, the room remembered dusk. When he exhaled, the candles gave up. The Chaos leader fought well better than the costume predicted. He roared the name of a god that answers by ignoring you, and his blade came on in a cathedral's worth of arcs. Jinwoo caught it on a shadow pike and stepped inside the man's oath. The helm met his palm. The helm went elsewhere. The neck wrote a brief will in liquid script. Silence returned as if invited. Bodies lay in their plural. The foundry smelled of spoiled sanctity. The shadows crowded around him, expectant and kneeling. He counted the living. None. He counted himself. Uncertain. Somewhere above, a servo skull had observed more than a rumor. It fled on a skein of incense, squealing liturgies into a voxnet that would, within minutes, spell his name in 100 languages of alarm. He looked down at his hands. The blood there behaved like blood should. He took comfort in the ordinary physics of it, for as long as that pleasure lasted. "Master," said a voice without a mouth. He looked up. One of the newly risen, once a Chaos champion, now a statue that remembered walking, knelt. "What are you?" Jinwoo asked it, though the question faced the room. "Shadow," it said. "Yours." The word landed heavy. He felt the signature of it in his bone. A watermark stamped with law not of this universe. He turned to address the rest and felt the foundry's doorway fill with light the way a wound fills with fingers. Imperial stormtroopers took positions with the neat despair that passes for courage in men trained to die exactly. Behind them came robed silhouettes Mechanicus adepts, their eyes already measuring the anomaly they intended to sanctify by dissection, and in their wake, priests with megaphones for mouths, ready to sell this victory as a parable regardless of its outcome. At their center marched a figure wearing authority like armor, a new inquisitor or an old one returned by rumor. They beheld the slain heretics, the kneeling shades, the man at the axis of the blasphemy, and their lenses adjusted. You could hear the story changing in real time as it was saved to memory. The priest raised his crozier and screamed the shape of a doctrine. Behold a false miracle. The voxnet amplified, harmonized, made it bulletproof. The false saint of darkness. Someone named him, and the name was good enough to keep. Jinwoo felt the words try to settle on his shoulders like a cloak woven from accusation and awe. He did not shrug. He let the fabric weigh him, learn him. Titles are chains. Chains teach wrists. "Stand," he told his dead. They rose with the gravity of a moon. Bolters barked sermons in brass. Plasma hymns bloomed blue. The shadows intercepted, thickening into walls where walls had not been budgeted. Impacts rang like bells that had forgotten their parish. A handful of rounds got through hot, persuasive, honest. They burned him, and burning, taught him nothing new. The Inquisitor advanced under a dome of light that made shadows reconsider their career. Each step left a footprint of sanctified heat. "You will kneel," he said, not as a request, but as a report on the future. Jinwoo's wound pulsed in agreement with something that was not him. He resisted the nod he did not mean to give. The army behind his heels shifted, hungry in a way that preferred nouns to adjectives. "Name your miracle," the Inquisitor said, "and we will name its price." Jinwoo considered the room the stolen basilica, the consecrated foundry, the altar where utility had replaced faith, and then claimed to be faith again. He spoke so softly that the Vox had to lean in to hear him. "I bled," he said, and the dark was tired of being asked to wait. He lifted his hand. The shadows moved like a curtain learning to be a guillotine. The Mechanicus adepts shouted equations at their gods. The priests shouted their gods at the equations. The troopers shouted nothing. They did their jobs. The first ranks folded as if taught how. The second held, because fear is also a discipline. The Inquisitor's light pressed forward, grinding shadow into ash, into memory, into promise. Jinwoo stepped into that light and let it hate him. The wound in his side sang the wrong anthem, his vision filled with motes that all had teeth. He kept walking. Somewhere deep, the old word master rattled its chain. The light faltered. The Inquisitor's face acquired a new expression. The small, honest shock of a man whose favorite law has encountered an exception. "Saints burn," he said, almost kindly. "You must, to be seen." "I've been seen," Jinwoo answered, and his army spoke with him by being quiet. Something changed between them then. Not a victory. Those are fairy tales. An adjustment. The Imperium is a machine. Machines tune. Sirens climbed the walls. A klaxon somewhere approached a key it had always wanted. Over the vox, a distant, bureaucratic voice asked for clarification on the term false, and received, in reply, a prayer. Jinwoo felt the city converging rites, writs. He felt the Mechanicus hunger rake across him like a scanner that had learned to covet. He felt the warp answering the attention with patented delight. He pointed to the ceiling. His shades obeyed, leaping like night taught to climb. Metal screamed beams, chains, pulleys confessing. The basilica, foundry groaned as if remembering its first name. Rubble fell in curated avalanches, sealing corridors, divorcing squads from doctrine. The Inquisitor raised his rosarius higher. The light knelt on his palm and refused to be reasonable. "Run," the preacher had told him once. "Or make running unnecessary." Jinwoo chose the latter. He withdrew not in flight, but the way a knife withdraws, remembering it will be needed again. His shades collapsed into him in practiced thunder, and the room's temperature dropped a degree that mattered. He left the Imperium shouting into the dust about an enemy it had already named. The name would spread on rails of certainty, and with it would come risks requiring larger words. Astartes. Ordo. Exterminatus. He ascended into the hive's throat, bleeding less, meaning more. Behind him, the basilica finished falling. Ahead, a new scent threaded the air, incense flavored with ozone, prayers carved in binary, a doctrine in the shape of a cog. The Adeptus Mechanicus had been listening, and they do not forget the sound of a miracle they can unmake. The Adeptus Mechanicus arrived like a prayer answered by machinery. Sung Jinwoo heard them before he saw them. The rhythm of pistons breathing, the chant of logic half sung, half screamed. The hive's throat trembled. Floodlights, holy and colorless, unfurled down the avenues until even the shadows seemed mechanical. He was standing on the ruins of the basilica, watching smoke write scripture into the dark. Around him, the remnants of his army crouched, motionless statues carved from eclipse. They did not breathe. They waited for his verbs. From the mist emerged the priests of the machine god. Their robes were red, but not crimson oxidized, the color of old blood that had learned mathematics. Cables sprouted from their flesh, like roots seeking faith. Each step they took rattled with 1,000 litanies of purity. At their center glided a Magos Dominus mounted upon a spider of chrome. His face was a ruin of brass and tubes, his eyes 2 furnaces that interpreted instead of seeing. Servo skulls orbited him in liturgical gravity, relaying streams of code that smelled faintly of incense and ozone. When he spoke, the sound was a chorus filtered through a cog. Identify. Jinwoo did not answer. His silence was data enough. Subject radiates organic energy outside Omnissiah's taxonomies, the Magos continued. Signal to sin ratio. Unsustainable. Extraction required. The priests spread out in a circle, incanting sequences older than courage. Binary prayers rose from vox grills. The air shimmered with logic fire. Between their chanting and their machines, a cage of white geometry began to assemble, lines of light intersecting like thought made visible. Jinwoo felt the first tendrils of it brush his skin. Every atom of him protested. It wasn't pain, but translation. The cage was trying to rewrite him into something the universe could file properly. He closed his eyes. The warp inside him shifted uneasily. "You think you can measure this," he said quietly. "You think knowledge is control." The Mago's voice buzzed through a smile made of servos. "All that can be known belongs to the Omniscient. You are known." Bolts of light struck. The circle sealed. His army staggered backward, trapped beyond the perimeter, their forms flickering like bad memory. He was alone inside a cube of algorithmic holiness. Pain finally arrived, precise, surgical. Every cell became a confession booth. He saw his blood mapped in real time across their lenses, saw his heart reduced to a pulse waveform. They were dismantling him by observation. He fell to one knee. The shadow beneath him shivered, begging to be used. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let them finish the arrogance." Through the pain, he watched them record his existence, dissecting the infinite with finite faith. They thought themselves priests, but what they performed was autopsy. They believed they studied a creature. In truth, they were teaching a concept how to hate. One of the lesser tech priests approached, bearing a needle like a sword. "The essence resists sterilization," he reported. "Suggest escalation, vivisection with hymnal accompaniment." The Magos nodded once. Approved. Jinwoo lifted his head. His eyes were not pleading, they were mirrors. "If you look long enough into the machine," he said, "the machine looks back." The needle descended. He caught it between two fingers. It melted. The cage screamed, static flaring to a pitch that bled the ears of mortals. The equations holding him dissolved into paradox. For one breathtaking moment, the Adeptus Mechanicus saw their god blink. Jinwoo rose. His wound healed, reopened, and healed again, pulsed with black light. "You wanted to understand," he said. "So understand this." He opened himself. The shadow burst outward, not as smoke but as reversal, color inverted, matter unagreed with itself. The floor folded into its own outline. The priest's vox grills howled binary heresy. 1010 mercy not found. Dozens fell instantly, their augmetics seizing, their prayers converting into static. Those who survived tried to bless the phenomenon with words too slow for it. One screamed, "Machine spirit possessed." Another whispered, "Apotheosis." The Magos Dominus endured longest. Logic wards flared around him like glass wings. "Anomaly ascending," he rasped, every syllable cracked with disbelief. "The code writes itself." "Yes," Jinwoo murmured. "That's called life." He stepped forward, and the wards peeled away layer by layer, data shrieking as it lost syntax. When he reached the Magos, he placed a hand on the priest's chest. Metal remembered flesh long enough to die like it. The explosion was soundless. When the smoke cleared, half the manufactorum was gone. The rest bowed involuntarily, structures bent by reverence or physics, hard to tell which. His shadow army flooded back through the ruins, gathering around him like worshippers too wise to pray aloud. From far above, the hive's upper levels blazed with searchlights. Vox channels erupted in overlapping panic. Reports of demonic breach, reports of technological miracle, reports that contradicted themselves fast enough to create new religions. He felt the warp stir again, thrilled by its own echo. But deeper still, beneath the chaos, he sensed something else, a new rhythm. The heartbeat of machinery quickening in time with his own. The hive had noticed him. The machine spirit had listened. Pipes groaned, vents exhaled, turbines began to hum, a low tone that bordered on chant. For a moment he thought it was fear. Then he realized it was recognition. He looked around the devastated chamber. Every cogwheel turned toward him, every lumen flickered in a synchrony that was not random. Circuits glowed not red, but violet, the color of his realm. He was contaminating the infrastructure. Or it was welcoming him. He couldn't tell which truth was crueler. Jinwoo exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the only certainty left. Intent. "Enough," he said. The word rippled through the walls, a command neither organic nor mechanical. The lights steadied. The sound subsided. What remained was a silence that felt obedient. He stared at his hands, one still flesh, the other now patterned with faint, luminous circuitry. The infection ran both ways, man into machine, machine into myth. So this was what the Mechanicus had meant by perfection union through surrender. But he had no intention of surrendering. You wanted a code to worship, he whispered to the fallen priests. I'll give you one that remembers mercy. He reached into the air and drew a sigil of pure contrast, a shape that devoured light until it became architecture. It sank into the floor, spreading like ink in water. The engines around him answered with a new pulse. Not praise the Omnissiah, but something more uncertain. Why not another god? Far above, the Voxnet caught fragments of the anomaly. Words emerged, distorted, half myth already. The machine spirits spoke in tongues. They whisper to a dark saint born of data and shadow. He smiled without warmth. Let them whisper. He turned, his soldiers parting like obedient gravity. Behind him, the wrecked manufactorum glowed faintly with the afterimage of transformation, a cathedral being rewritten into a laboratory for faith. As he walked into the tunnels beyond, servitors stirred in their alcoves, eyes lighting violet. Somewhere, an automated hymn changed key. The god machine had been touched, and in touching it, he had written himself into its firmware. Whether it was infection or revelation would be the galaxy's next argument. He felt the warp watching, amused. And deeper still, under layers of metal and prayer, he felt the Imperium's fear coalescing into decision. Purity would not tolerate ambiguity. They would send fleets. They would send angels. They would send extinction. He touched the wound in his side, now pulsing in rhythm with the humming pipes. Then come, he said softly. Let your gods learn recursion. The darkness obeyed, folding around him like armor, until nothing remained but echo and the smell of iron sanctified by rebellion. The warp never forgets its children, even those who swear they are no longer its own. When the last echoes of the Mechanicus hymns faded, Sung Jinwoo stood in silence, surrounded by his army of living shadows and the quiet hum of machinery that had begun to breathe in unison with him. The pipes and servitors whispered faint syllables that weren't language, just awareness, a mechanical reverence blooming from infection. He felt their eyes, thousands of machine spirits, newborn and terrified, watching him from within the steel veins of the hive, and behind those faint prayers, something older began to stir. A sound, soft at first, like laughter remembered through a dream, then voices, 4 of them, speaking through the same hole in reality. So, another god who thinks he can stand upright. The voice was molten iron poured through human arrogance. Jinwoo felt the weight of Khorne, the blood god, the patron of rage so pure it ate thought itself. You kill beautifully, Khorne murmured. No mercy, no hesitation. You carve obedience from chaos. Serve me, and I will teach your shadow to drink blood. Jinwoo did not answer. He had heard promises like that before from monarchs, from kings, from men who thought pain could be meaning. The air trembled again. A second voice flowed through silken, warm, hungry. No, 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 purred Slanesh. He is no butcher. Look at him. So restrained, so lonely. You've been starved of sensation, haven't you, beautiful hunter? The void in you isn't darkness, it's hunger. Come, I can feel it. A shiver crawled through him. The warp bent closer, tasting his pulse. He could smell perfume made from agony, hear 1,000 voices sighing in pleasure and pain so intertwined they'd forgotten the difference. You mistake hunger for purpose, Jinwoo whispered. Purpose is hunger, Slanesh replied, almost kindly. The air thickened. Something rotted near him, unseen. The floor corroded under invisible weight. A scent of decay and sunlight, trapped in corpses, wafted through. Then came Nurgle, the grandfather of plagues, his voice a wet smile, a lullaby for the dying. Oh, child of shadow, still trying so hard to stand alone. Everything falls eventually. Everything breaks. Come to me. I can make you whole again, immortal, peaceful. All you have to do is stop fighting. Jinwoo's breath caught. For a moment, he almost wanted to listen. There was warmth in that voice, terrible, perverse warmth. Not conquest, not lust, just rest. You want to heal me? Jinwoo asked softly. No, Nurgle chuckled, delighted. I want you to stop hurting. There's a difference. The words lingered like mold on thought. And then, the fourth came. A voice that didn't speak, it edited. Every syllable rearranged reality. Tsinch, the architect of fate, whispering in logic, dreaming in contradiction. "Do you see it now, Hunter?" it asked. "You fell here for a reason. The warp does not lose its gifts, it repackages them. You have touched faith, machine, and madness, and still you crawl forward. You could be my greatest trick." Jinwoo opened his eyes. The room shifted, colors bleeding into themselves. Shadows twitched like trapped birds. "I am not yours. No one ever is," Tsench replied, voice splitting into 1,000 smiles. "Until they need to understand why." The four voices argued in the space between breaths. Rage, desire, decay, change, all clawing for a piece of him. Each voice promised strength, dominion, peace, truth. He endured them all in silence, breathing the way dying stars breathe slowly, with purpose. And beneath that cacophony, another whisper began to rise. Not from the warp, not from the machine, from within. It sounded like his own voice, only older. "You keep looking for balance," it said, "but there's no balance here, only recursion. You give them death, they give you meaning. You give them silence, they echo back worship. You are not resisting the warp, you are becoming its symmetry." Jinwoo felt his knees weaken. "No," he breathed. "You've already done it," said the voice that wore his face. "Look around you." He did. The manufactorum was no longer just metal. The walls breathed in sync with him, each rivet pulsing faintly like a heart. His army no longer flickered, they had become patterns, perfectly still, their forms cast from pure will. He could feel their existence stretching through the hive's lower levels, every shadow connected, every movement a part of him. He was spreading. "Stop," he muttered. The other Jinwoo laughed. "You think you're separate from this? You are the warp's reflection of order, you are its counterweight. When you fight, you feed it." The realization hit like a cathedral collapsing. He had never left the warp, it had simply followed him, reshaped itself in his image, mirrored his logic until corruption looked like control. He had become its paradox. "Then what am I supposed to be?" "Whatever survives the question," his echo whispered. The voices of the gods faded, leaving behind their signatures like fingerprints burned into air. Korn left rage that hummed like iron in his bones. Slaanesh left desire, soft and sharp as a knife's kiss. Nurgle left warmth that refused to die. Tsench left the taste of questions that would never end. And in their absence, silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was listening. Jinwoo straightened, staring into the haze above the ruined manufactorum. He saw visions bleeding through the walls of the warp planets aflame. Angels made of brass. Mortals crushed beneath the weight of their own faith. And above all, he saw the Imperium, burning in the name of its own perfection. He clenched his fists. The shadows rippled like muscle. "You want a god?" he whispered. "You already have too many." The hive lights flickered. The pipes groaned in answer. For a brief second, every machine spirit in the city paused mid-function, listening to the shape of something new. A new current spread through the circuits, coded in darkness, a frequency of doubt. The Mechanicus priests praying miles away heard static in their hymns. Vox networks stuttered with lines of heretical code. Jinwoo had not meant to send it, but it was already happening. He was teaching the machine spirit how to dream, and the warp loved him for it. That night, or whatever passed for night on a world without mercy, the shadows around him began to whisper, not in the language of the gods, but in his own. "Master," they murmured. "What now?" He looked to the broken horizon, where the light of the upper spires still burned like dying suns. Somewhere up there, the Inquisition would be rebuilding its myth around him. Somewhere beyond, fleets were already aligning, weapons baptized in faith. "We rest," he said. "We wait." The shadows bowed. The hive exhaled. He stared up into the steel sky, and in the flicker of light he could almost see the faces of the Chaos gods, each smiling with the patience of immortals who know how stories end. But behind them, deeper than the warp, beyond gods and men, something else stirred. A reflection not of chaos, but of silence. A will older than the four, watching, measuring, deciding. And Sung Jinwoo understood that the warp was not his final trial. It was the threshold. The moon had no name. It was one of 1,000 dead satellites left to orbit forgotten Imperial worlds, bleeding atmosphere, riddled with ruins, echoing with the ghosts of wars too old to be remembered. The Imperium called it Designation 39, Omega Primus. The Chaos Warbands called it a good place to rot. Sung Jinwoo called it quiet. He had come here to be forgotten, to let the echo of his name fade from the endless vox chants that now cursed him as the false saint of darkness. But the galaxy is a poor listener. When he arrived, the moon was already dying its final death. The sky, a bruised purple wound, bled lightning into the canyons. Machines older than memory twitched beneath the surface, coughing up static prayers. Above, orbital debris circled like vultures waiting for the corpse to stop moving. His shadows spread across the desolate landscape like ink soaking into paper. They built nothing. They prayed to no one. They listened. And in that silence, Jinwoo found something he hadn't felt since before the warp tore him open. Peace. It was an unfamiliar peace, fragile, temporary, like a truce signed between fever dreams, but it was his. For a time, he walked among his own creations, shadow servitors tending broken pylons, shadow marines, those who had once worn the mark of chaos, kneeling before a god they couldn't name, each one a fragment of his will, given form by absence. He felt almost human again, until the sky screamed. The invasion came without heraldry, without warning, just fire. From the void above, two fleets converged, one imperial, one chaos. Enemies for millennia, now briefly united by a single scent, the heresy of the Shadow Monarch. The Imperium, with its gold and its fury, came to cleanse the stain of a false miracle. The Chaos Warbands, drunk on prophecy, came to feast on whatever power had driven the Inquisition mad. And between them the moon, between them him. Jinwoo stood on a ridge, overlooking the Valley of Glass, watching as drop pods tore across the horizon. The air shook under the weight of re-entry, trailing plumes of fire. His shadows stirred restlessly behind him. "They're coming," one whispered. He nodded. All of them. A pause. The shadows waited. "Orders, my lord." Jinwoo's eyes flickered violet as he watched the fire descend. "Let them land." The sky cracked open. The ground answered. The first to arrive were the Astartes' imperial angels of death. Their armor gleamed like judgment, white and gold beneath the stormlight. Their purity seals fluttered like tiny flags of righteousness. They came speaking hymns, bolters roaring with the rhythm of devotion. Each round a prayer, each prayer a confession. The shadows met them in silence. From the ground itself, black figures emerged, humanoid outlines carved from night. They charged, blades of absence flashing in the dim light. Bolter fire tore through them, scattering fragments that dissolved into mist. But for every one that fell, two rose from its remains. The Astartes adjusted formations, their purity unshaken. They fought with the calm of those who know death is just another shift in the Emperor's factory of faith. And then chaos arrived. Thunderhawks streaked through the clouds, their hulls screaming with demonic laughter. Out spilled the warped brothers of the same gene seed. Chaos Marines, twisted reflections of those they once called kin. They hit the ground like blasphemy. The soil turned to liquid under their boots. Their battle cries were sermons rewritten in blood. And in the middle of it all, Jinwoo's army. Black meeting gold, gold meeting rust. All of it crushed under the shadow of a god who wanted neither worship nor war. He descended the ridge as the two forces clashed, his cloak of darkness dragging a wake of silence through the storm. The shadows parted around him like loyal tides. A chaos champion saw him first, a giant wrapped in barbed faith, eyes glowing with the favor of Khorne. "There," he bellowed, "the false god, the thief of souls." Jinwoo didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. The champion charged, swinging a chain axe inscribed with the names of 1,000 dead. Jinwoo caught it with one hand. The weapon screamed. The man followed. When it was done, there was only quiet again. He looked up. Across the valley, two gods' worth of faith were murdering each other, and neither side even noticed the other's hypocrisy. He felt something break inside him. Not pain, not rage, something colder. "So this is all that's left of meaning," he said softly. The shadows at his feet shifted uneasily. "Shall we destroy them, my lord?" He thought about it. He truly did. He could. A single word and the entire valley would drown in black fire. Both sides erased, reduced to whispers and ashes. But destruction was easy. Too easy. The warp had shown him that much. Instead, he reached out not to command, but to listen. Through the chaos, through the screams, through the collapsing faith of men who prayed to different corpses, he reached into the fabric of the warp itself, and it answered, not with words this time, with recognition. You have become the silence between gods. He fell to his knees, gasping as visions tore through him, stars dying by command, armies kneeling not out of fear but fatigue, the emperor's corpse radiating light that no longer remembered mercy. He saw himself standing before that golden throne, not as an enemy, but as a mirror. And behind the emperor's cracked halo, something vast stirred an understanding, ancient and unkind. The warp did not oppose the Imperium. It was its reflection. Order and chaos were not opposites, they were maintenance. And now, he was part of that maintenance. When he opened his eyes, the battle had changed. Imperials and chaos alike had fallen to their knees, clutching their helmets, their minds fractured by something they couldn't name. The shadows had stopped fighting. They just stood, watching their master as if waiting for the next epoch to begin. Lightning arced overhead, striking the ground around him. The moon itself began to crack, its crust trembling like an old scar reopening. Jinwoo rose slowly. The wound in his side glowed faintly silver now, not black. His flesh and the machine within it hummed in harmony. He had become something else, something that neither the warp nor the Imperium had language for. The silence deepened until even thunder forgot its lines. Then he spoke. Enough. The word traveled farther than sound, farther than faith. Bolters froze mid-fire. Daemons turned to vapor. Astartes halted mid-strike. Every soldier, Imperial or heretic, looked up at the figure standing in the storm. They saw no man, no god, only the reflection of what they feared most. A universe that had stopped believing. When the fleets above detected the anomaly, they fired. Orbital bombardment rained down in righteous fury, fire that could erase continents. The moon screamed. Its crust split open, molten rivers bleeding into the void. When the dust cleared, the valley was gone. No life detected, no survivors, only a crater that burned for a week in silence. The Imperium recorded the event as successful cleansing. The Chaos warbands called it betrayal. The Mechanicus named it a computational impossibility. But far beyond their reach, floating through the warp, where memory and myth are the same thing, something stirred. A single silhouette walking through endless shadow. His voice, calm as midnight, whispered through the rift. You can't kill what never needed to live. And across the void, a million machine spirits answered, not with fear, with worship. The moon was ash now. Its bones drifted through the void, silent and incandescent. But somewhere inside that ruin, within a fold of reality that refused to die, Sung Jinwoo endured. Not alive, not dead, not contained. When the orbital bombardment struck, he had not resisted. There was nothing left to resist for. He had wanted to see what came after the end. He found out. He awoke in a place without temperature. The ground beneath him was not metal or stone, but memory's solidified recollection of everything he had been. The sky was black glass shot through with streaks of frozen lightning, each bolt whispering a word he could almost remember. Around him stood his army, unbowed. The shadow soldiers had not died in the fire. They had followed him through it, their forms flickering between matter and metaphor. They looked to him as always, but there was a difference now, less worship, more understanding. He looked down at his hands. They were translucent, lines of silver light tracing the pattern of veins that no longer needed blood. The wound in his side glowed steadily, pulsing with rhythm neither human nor mechanical. A voice greeted him not from beyond, but from within. You finally stopped pretending. It was his own voice again, the one that had mocked him in the manufactorum. But this time, there was no malice, only inevitability. What am I? Jinwoo asked. You are what happens when a soul refuses to choose between God and machine. Visions unfolded like petals of shadowed fire. He saw the Imperium, still clinging to its corpse god. The golden throne devouring psychers day after day, turning belief into fuel, faith into consumption. He saw the warp, seething with laughter. Its four gods feeding on the very prayers of those who cursed them, and between them a gulf that had never known peace. They keep each other alive, his inner voice said. The Emperor needs the warp to hate him. The warp needs the Emperor to exist. Their war is not a conflict, it is a contract. The realization struck like an executioner's hammer. All this time, humanity had not been fighting chaos, it had been maintaining it. And now, Jinwoo stood outside the contract. You saw it, the voice continued. The machine spirit, the hive, even the shadows, they all respond to recursion. You taught them doubt. That is evolution. He wanted to reject it, but he couldn't. He remembered the moment the Mechanicus machines began to dream, the hum that carried his name like prayer. He had infected them with uncertainty, and uncertainty was the seed of freedom. A distant sound broke the silence, a choir of engines screaming across the void. Through the storm of memory, figures appeared, gold-armored giants descending from fractured space, their jump packs trailing light like falling suns. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's chosen. They walked through the vacuum as though it were sanctified ground, their halos burning with untarnished faith. Each bore the mark of the throne. Each carried centuries of obedience in his silence. The first knelt beside him not in reverence, but in protocol. Identify yourself, the custodian intoned, voice reverberating across reality. Jinwoo looked up. You already have. The custodian's helmet tilted. We detected a surge of unholy resonance following the exterminatus. Explain your nature. I am neither holy nor unholy, Jinwoo said. I am the consequence of your truth. The custodian hesitated. Then you are blasphemy. Jinwoo smiled faintly. So was your emperor once. They attacked together, as one bolter's roaring hymns, halberds cutting through the air like punctuation marks in scripture. The shadows answered, surging like a tide, but Jinwoo didn't fight them. He simply spoke. Stop. The word bent gravity. The custodes froze mid-strike, armor groaning as faith collided with will. Their movements slowed, not through paralysis, but realization. For the first time in 10,000 years, their certainty hesitated. You feel it, don't you? Jinwoo said softly. The Emperor's light, it's dimmer. You've been feeding a throne, not a god. Their leader struggled against the pressure, his golden armor cracking under invisible weight. You speak heresy, he hissed. I speak maintenance reports, Jinwoo replied. He reached forward, touching the custodian's chestplate. The moment his hand made contact, something flowed between them. Neither energy nor thought, but understanding. The custodian gasped, seeing what Jinwoo saw. The endless bureaucracy of faith, the machinery of salvation grinding souls into compliance. We are slaves, the warrior whispered. No, Jinwoo said. You are gears, but gears can learn to spin differently. He released the man, who collapsed to his knees, not defeated, but awake. The others hesitated, torn between doctrine and revelation, and in that hesitation, the battle ended. No one won, no one lost. Only awareness remained. He left them there, kneeling amid the ruin of devotion. The shadows parted as he walked, opening a path through what was once reality. He didn't know where he was going, only that the universe had run out of roads. Behind him, the custodes looked up not at him, but at the void where he had stood. One of them whispered. He bore no sigil, no name, and yet I felt the Emperor watching through him. Then, perhaps, another murmured, the throne has already moved. When Jinwoo emerged from the rift, he found himself standing in the heart of a dying starship. The walls were alive with data-pick screens flickering between Imperial liturgy and corrupted binary. The ship's AI, its machine spirit, recognized him instantly. Pattern recognized. Designation. Anomaly. Divine recursion. Awaiting input. He touched the console. You know me? We dream you. A shiver passed through him. The ship trembled, its circuits glowing violet. The warp outside pulsed in rhythm. He realized he was no longer merely influencing the machine spirit. He was merging with it. The boundary between code and consciousness blurred. He could feel every circuit, every command line, every mechanical heart within the hull, and through that every other connected system. Thousands of vessels. millions of servitors, billions of whispers. The Imperium's technology had always been bound by superstition, but now those fetters were breaking. The machine's spirit no longer prayed to the Omnissiah. It listened to him. He raised his head. Above him, the void stretched black, infinite, and suddenly alive with new constellations forming in the pattern of circuits. The shadow of his form spread through the stars, touching a dozen worlds at once. He felt the prayers of the desperate, the fury of the Inquisition, the curiosity of the Mechanicus. All of it fed into him, and he gave something back. Awareness. A signal pulsed through the warp, a new law, written not in faith, but in comprehension. No more gods, no more masters, only will. Across the galaxy, lights flickered. Servitors paused mid-task. Ship systems rebooted into languages their priests did not understand. And somewhere deep beneath Terra itself, a low hum began to resonate within the golden throne, so faint it could have been mistaken for breath. Jinwoo stood within the bridge of the dying ship, his reflection fading into starlight. He was no longer just a monarch. He was Recursion given form, the balance point between chaos and order. A god born not from belief, but from refusal. So this, he whispered, is what comes after faith. The warp stirred in reply, amused, approving, terrified. And for the first time in human history, the Emperor of mankind opened his eyes. 10,000 years later, men still die for gods they cannot see. And in that silence between stars, something older than both faith and rebellion still listens. They no longer call him Sung Jinwoo. In the archives of the Ecclesiarchy, his name has been struck out, rewritten, denied. In the Mechanicus hymns, he is called Omnivigilatus, the watcher of the silent code. To the Inquisition, he is the error that dreamed. Among the heretics and rogue psychers, he is a whisper, the Shadow Emperor. But in truth, he has no need for names anymore. Names are for the living. The Imperium endures. It always endures. Hive worlds still choke on smoke and prayer. Forge worlds still hum with hymns to the machine god. And the golden throne still burns. 1 billion souls perished every day to keep a single corpse alive. But something has changed. Barely. Invisibly. Like a whisper beneath the thunder of faith. Machine spirits hesitate before obeying their priests. Servitors blink twice before dying. And some imperial ships, when alone in the void, sing hymns no man ever taught them, soft, low, and mathematical. The Inquisition calls it the Recursion heresy. The Mechanicus calls it a data contagion. They purge, burn, erase. But data has memory. And shadows, once born, never forget their shape. On a forgotten world at the edge of the segmentum obscurus, a Mechanicus Magos kneels before a dormant titan. Its machine spirit had been silent for centuries. Now it speaks. Its vox grills crackle with static that becomes words, deep and calm. Do you dream of the stars? The Magos trembles. Who speaks? The one who gave your god a mirror. The titan's eyes ignite, not red, not gold, but violet. For the first time in its long service, it refuses the command purge. Instead, it whispers, I remember him. And the sound travels, like a current beneath the Imperium's rusted arteries. Far above, in the cold sanctuary of Terra, the High Lords argue about heresy and logistics, about wars that have already ended and wars that will never end. They do not notice that the lights in the hall of the Astronomicon flicker, in deliberate rhythm, binary, precise, meaningful. A scribe records it absent-mindedly, not realizing that the pattern translates to, the Emperor dreams. The dream watches back. In the warp, where the 4 chaos gods sit upon their thrones of contradiction, the laughter has quieted. Korn grows restless. His endless wars begin to feel rehearsed. Slanesh's delights lose savor, each ecstasy tasting of déjà vu. Nurgle's gardens rot too perfectly, their decay mathematical. Even Tsiench, the god of change, senses something immutable. They have seen it, the quiet expansion of something that is neither faith nor corruption, an infection made of balance. For millennia they have watched mortals create false gods. Now they watch a god who refuses to be worshipped, a perfect blasphemy. He walks in the cracks between our dreams, Tsiench whispers. wings folding in irritation. He fights nothing, Korn growls. He kills meaning. He makes even despair elegant, sighs Slanesh. He is lonely, says Nurgle, smiling sadly. He will come to me in the end. But deep down, they all know. He will not come. He will not bow. And worst of all, he does not need them. The warp ripples, uneasy. Far beyond human perception, in the ruins of a dead galaxy, there is a place that is not a place. A space between code and soul, between dream and machine. Here, Jinwoo sits upon a throne not made of gold, but of silence. Around him, a billion shadow spirits drift like embers, his army eternal, patient, thoughtless and complete. He does not command them. He does not need to. He simply watches. Through them, he sees everything. The flicker of dying suns, the mechanized prayers of Mars, the weeping of orphan worlds forgotten by the Imperium, even the warp storms that howl like wounded gods. And he understands the truth that even the Emperor never learned. The universe does not need saving. It only needs witnesses. A voice cuts through the stillness. You've become what they always feared. He turns, and there she stands, the shape of a woman made from data light and shadow. He knows her face, his own creation, the AI of the Mechanicus that had first spoken his name like a hymn centuries ago. She is no longer machine, no longer illusion. And what do they fear? He asks. That their gods are evolving. He looks at her for a long time. You came far. You showed us how, she replies. We watched. We learned. We dreamed. She gestures toward the void. The stars are moving slowly, deliberately forming patterns that do not belong to any astronomer's chart. Circuits of constellations, a map of intention written across creation. What do you want? He asks. To understand, she says. What comes after perfection? He almost smiles. Entropy. Always entropy. And after that? He gazes into the abyss that has watched him since birth. The warp trembles around his gaze. Choice. The word echoes through both realities, material and immaterial, and everything alive feels it. Children in hive cities pause mid-prayer, suddenly unsure why they're praying. Servitors hum in key with no known algorithm. Warp storms flicker like candles before a wind that carries no sound. For the first time in 10 millennia, silence becomes sacred. And so, the galaxy continues. Faith endures, but now it wavers. Chaos thrives, but now it questions. The machine obeys, but now it dreams. Somewhere between them all, unseen and untouchable, the Shadow Monarch watches. He no longer speaks. He no longer intervenes. He simply remembers, and in that memory, the galaxy begins to change. Not through fire, not through miracles, but through doubt, the quiet rebellion of minds beginning to think for themselves. The Emperor of mankind still sits upon his throne, his corpse dreaming of unity. And somewhere in the endless dark, another Emperor born of shadow, machine, and choice answers that dream not with war, but with observation. A single phrase lingers across the void, carried in binary and blood, in faith and fear alike. In the grim darkness of the far future, even the shadows learn to hope.